Welcome back to Close Up. COVID-19 has touched or altered just about everything in our lives these days, and the once-a-decade process of redistricting, the redrawing of the state's political maps, is no exception. The release of U.S. Census data has been delayed by the pandemic until September. Normally, things would be kicking into high gear later this month. Now, a lot will have to wait. But there is still some work that can be done and plenty to discuss. Here this morning to do just that are two members of the House Special Committee on Redistricting, the chairwoman, Representative Barbara Griffin, a Republican from Goffstown, and Representative Matt Wilhelm, Democrat from Manchester. Thank you both for joining us. And let's start with you, Representative Griffin. This is a political process and Republicans hold majorities in the legislature, but you said in that first meeting you wanted to move forward, quote, as a committee with everybody involved. Explain that when that means, when oftentimes the meat and potatoes of this process can happen behind closed doors.
Thank you. Good morning, and thanks for having me with you. As you stated, we have a committee that has been formed to look at the redistricting process, which happens every 10 years based on census data and required by our Constitution. It's done by the legislature, and it's done by people who are representative of that body, who are representative of the elected people, of all of the people of the state. So we have a committee formed with Republicans and Democrats that corresponds somewhat to the makeup of the House. We have 8 Republican members and 7 Democrat members. And that body, of which I have the honor of chairing, is charged with the responsibility of presenting a plan to the legislature to approve that will go forward to be the basis for everyone's elective choices for the next 10 years. And the process needs to occur in public for those decisions to be made. So this week we had a meeting to comply with House process rules, which is to put the bills that will allow us to do this in the legislative process formally before the committee. They were introduced, accepted, and retained, which means that the body this year, 2020, will not be voting on them, but it gives us the ability, the committee members, an ability to move forward to consider them so there can be a vote next year.
And Representative Wilhelm, if Democrats had their way, you wouldn't be here right now. This would be an independent redistricting commission. What's the extent of your trust in this current process?
Well, I think it's good that you picked up on that sentiment. Trust it's a big part of this. I think in New Hampshire, we know that the foundation of our democracy is, free and fair elections. And right now, voters' trust in our public institutions is really at an all-time low. I'm with redistricting starting this week, we have a really unique and a rare opportunity to help Granite Staters help restore their trust and confidence in our democracy. But that's really only if we choose to take it. It's unfortunate, but it's understandable that the release of census data to states has been delayed due to the pandemic. The practical reality is that our committee is going to have less time to do our work. But I do think that there's a silver lining. That delay has provided us with an opportunity to take time over the next few months to design and implement a process that's fair, that's transparent, that has boundless opportunities for public input. Would I like to have been, to have an independent redistricting advisory commission? Absolutely. Democrats and Republicans really rallied around that. It was one of the things that we found consensus on last term. Unfortunately, it was vetoed not once but twice by Governor Sununu. Just as recently as this past week, Chairwoman Griffin and her Republican colleagues in the Election Law Committee unanimously opposed House Bill 428, which was a bipartisan bill that would require the redistricting committee to, make maps available online, to hold Zoom meetings for the public, and give members of both parties access to the same redistricting software. Republicans, unfortunately, voted that down. So it just it puts it on us as members of the redistricting committee under the chairwoman's leadership to design a process, again, that's fair and transparent and inclusive, because that's what we've been fighting for.
Representative Griffin, what's your reaction there? I watch you on the House Election Law Committee. I know you like to run a fair meeting. So how do you move forward on this one, even knowing that, this is a political process and there are winners and losers?
God bless you for watching my committee meetings, because I know they can go on for quite a while. And thanks for your comments. I try to run a fair meeting, and this process for redistricting will be fair. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the Independent Redistricting Commission, because what's been very interesting in this debate is we have a lot of discussion about how we need to have members on this commission to go forward, all of which I would point out are basically appointed by partisan individuals involved in the legislative process. But there really has not been to date anything to show that the redistricting allegedly independently done has been independent by any means. There's recently a study about something that was done in California that establishes that, in fact, it was partisan working behind the scenes to do that. I know there have been other issues in other states. So I just want to respond to that and leave it there. In regards to the issues of going forward, I think we have to remember that we have this process that was established, that it has been directed to us more specifically in our Constitution. And as you point out, it is a political process, and court decisions have been very clear that it is a political process, that there are going to be disagreements about how things ultimately get resolved. And my hope is that to the extent those disagreements exist and continue to exist, that people can agree that the process that has occurred has been fair, and they understand why the results have been reached.
Representative Griffin, one follow-up for you there. The NHGOP chairman has been very direct in saying that he expects a conservative Republican to be elected to Congress in 2022 because of redistricting. What was your reaction when you heard that?
The chairman of the GOP has the right to say what he wants. I think from his perspective, the Republicans had a very successful election this past November, and he's hoping for that to continue. My reaction to it is really just that. It doesn't impact what the committee does, and it doesn't impact how the process is going to go forward. The reality is congressional districts are required to be formed in a population representation format. And I know that, from a party standpoint, I'm sure he wants a Republican to be elected. That's not the issue for the Redistricting Commission.
Representative Wilhelm, I'm sure that's received a little bit differently on your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all pretty shocked and frankly troubled when, when Chairman Stepanek declared Republicans, because they controlled redistricting, he wants to guarantee a conservative Republican is going to be elected to Congress in 2022. It's brazen. It is deeply cynical in terms of a political statement. Yes, politics are going to play a role in this process, which is exactly why we were pushing for independent redistricting. I think, it's just important for us to note where we are right now. We are still just weeks from the insurrection at the Capitol. It's a dangerous reminder that our growing partisan divide in this country, which is a result of gerrymandering, it really needs to end. And gerrymandered maps, they create a political system where, most of the electoral battles aren't happening for the general election. They're happening in primaries. And, it results in elected officials catering more and more to just the partisan extremes that push, voters to the extreme. So we need competitive districts where candidates from each party debate the issues most important to the people, instead of running to the extreme corners of their party. So, I think when you've got the New Hampshire GOP guaranteeing a conservative Republican is going to be elected to Congress in 2022, it is just a promise to gerrymander, to cheat and weaken our democracy. And that's why Democrats have been fighting for a fair and transparent redistricting process. And, I really think that the future of our democracy depends on doing it the right way.
Representative Wilhelm, I've heard some argue that it's not fair that a purple state like New Hampshire should have an all-blue delegation, essentially, in Washington, that there should be some Republican representation there. Do you agree in some way that it's unfair that the state doesn't have a more accurate representation in Washington?
You know what? I think that we've got two pretty close congressional districts in terms of partisan split. and that makes for really competitive general elections, and it allows in those general elections to focus on issues that are most important to the constituents there, and that's good for our democracy. What I would hate to see is one of those, whether it's CD1 or CD2, skew more Democratic and the other skew more Republican, because it means that we're going to have pretty extreme representatives. I think we've seen that in some of the states that were severely gerrymandered in the 2011 redistricting process.
Representative Griffin, that gerrymandering is going to be an accusation from the outset here. In New Hampshire, it's not quite like we see in some states that Representative Wilhelm has mentioned, where you see these really insane, just sort of kind of blocks. But we do have Executive Council District 2, that kind of serpentine district that runs from the Monadnock region all the way over to the seacoast. Do you believe that's an example of gerrymandering, and would you like to see that change?
No, I don't. The plan that is currently in place that provides for districting was brought to court. It was addressed. It was approved. To the extent Representative Wilhelm wants to go talking about other states and what they do, I guess the only thing I'd point out is that Massachusetts, where a lot of our more progressive citizens come from, is the home of gerrymandering. And to the extent he's accusing that the current process or the past process generated gerrymandering, referring to the congressional districts, and somehow that's fair, I'd point out that there wasn't gerrymandering, apparently, because it's been more Democrats elected in the CD districts over the past 10 years than Republican. So, the selective picking of things has been ongoing in this debate, and we hear things from other states that aren't applicable. In regards to the Executive Council,
and sorry, Representative Griffin, we actually hit our time here. We've been discussing this for so long. We could, what, you should bring you back later in the year. We can get to more of this. We appreciate your time, Representative.